Hi, welcome to the first episode of Youth Who Care About Climate, an interview series where we will be interviewing young climate activists from all over the world. We have Saoirse Exton today with us, who is an Irish climate activist and who will be sharing her experiences in climate activism. So don't forget to follow us for following episodes on climate activism with our series Youth Who Care About Climate and subscribe us on our YouTube channel.
So, hey everyone, my name is Saoirse. I'm 18 and I'm a climate activist from Ireland. I got involved in climate activism in 2019. When I was 13, I founded my local Fridays for Future movement and I started climate striking every Friday. And I was also involved in a national level and then eventually an international level. But I think, for me, that's really what propelled me into this space, the activism, the grassroots involvement. And I think for me, that's always been really important. Like whatever I go on and do, it's always about, empowering the grassroots, listening to the grassroots and recognizing that collective action is the most powerful form of change making. Then in 2020, I got elected to the Irish Second Level Students Union as a quality officer, and that really introduced me to like legislative advocacy. And I was subsequently re-elected. But I think for me, it also revealed the importance of climate justice in terms of climate action. It's not just about environmental action, it's also about ensuring equity and equality for all people. Because inequality shares the same roots as climate change, and they feed it into one another. And then I was also the same year selected to the C40 Cities Global Youth and Mayors Forum, and again that's a C40 Cities is a network of a global network of the mayors of the world's megacities, and again that really introduced me to international advocacy, and legislative advocacy once again. And then more recently, I was selected to the UN Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change, which is a bit of a mouthful, but that's obviously been an incredibly like an opportunity, but also just a very different experience to anything I've done before. So yeah, I'm particularly interested in the economics of climate change. And as an Irish language speaker, it's really important for me to recognize that the element of cultural loss as a result of climate change, and how we can kind of preserve our languages, especially traditional and indigenous languages that have such ties to the earth and environment itself. How we can preserve those, and therefore take climate action from preserving those. So yeah.
Thank you so much for introducing yourself, and of course, it's the everything that you mentioned about the loss of culture and how close you feel to that purpose itself. So I would further like to know what is the kind of your own personal story. What is it that ignited passion within you to fight for climate justice? All of us who are in the climate movement, all us young people have had that moment, that turnaround point where we decided that this is it. Now we have to be involved and we have to be appreciated and involved in climate policy itself to be recognized for the purpose of course, intergenerational justice. So what was that moment that ignited that passion within you for the climate justice and youth movement itself?
I think in 2019 or 2018, actually, I think there was a referendum in Ireland, and it was about giving bodily autonomy to women, and or to anyone. I mean, it was just bodily autonomy in general. And I remember it was my first time kind of encountering politics. I think I was about 11 or 12, and yeah, it was my first time really coming face to face with actual on the street activism. And I had never really seen it before. And I remember we went to like the count for the referendum, and afterwards, apparently I turned around to my mother and I said that was my feminist awakening. And so from that moment, I think I was really, I really wanted to be involved in something. But I sort of thought to myself that, well, I'm a child, so I'm going to have to wait until I'm at least 18, being able to vote and all of these things, being an adult. And then I remember I saw, I think it was later that year, in late 2018, that I saw videos of the massive climate strikes that happened in Australia. And I was kind of like, wow, that's like young people leading those protests. And so I think that kind of opened up the possibility for me that, you know, the idea that actually young people can be involved in politics and activism, because it's something that isn't really encouraged, I feel. And I sort of I just threw myself into it. And I think it was only really after I started getting involved in climate activism that I realized just how much of a kind of world defining issue climate change is, and how much it affects every single facet of our society. Because, you know, we're taught that again, it's like purely an environmental thing. And that again, it's something that's kind of far off, especially in, you know, the West, in Ireland. You know, we're not necessarily feeling all of the full extent of the climate crisis, or we're starting only to feel it now. So it's very much taught as something that is over there, that will happen eventually, but at some kind of undefined time. But I think by being involved, I encountered both communities within Ireland and the science, and then communities outside of Ireland, and I realized, wow, like this is truly an issue that I don't understand why nobody else kind of thought to do this earlier. And so it became a kind of necessity for me to be involved in climate activism. And I think I still carry that with me today. Like it's not a hobby, it's not something I do because it's fun or whatever, because often it's not fun. But it's because I truly feel like it's the best way I can kind of contribute to hopefully making change.
Thank you for sharing that. I feel that the frustration is so common between all us young people. And of course, that sense of no one really recognizing of the immediate need of acting on climate action and climate change is quite frustrating in itself. And I think these commonalities between all us young people has been has what that's what has brought us together in many ways, right? In this entire climate youth movement, and you always feel belonged in this, at least in the climate youth movement, and we're always here to support each other, which is the one big thing that we all take away from this experience of being, a part of a bigger movement. So yeah, of course. I also wanted to ask you, while you have been engaged, of course, you mentioned that you have been, out there since you were 30, right? And that's quite a young age to, recognize that something this huge is happening, and even to register it. So what holds the most importance for you since you have started campaigning for climate justice? What has been the most important moment for you, or the important, thing to cater to when it comes to fight against climate change?
I think there's kind of several things. I don't know if there's like one most important thing, I think definitely one of them is kind of what you were talking about in terms of that feeling of collective identity, and like a community, because I feel like so often in our societies, we're taught, first of all, that everyone is inherently bad and greedy, and they're all evil. And in reality, I think what we crave is that community, and we're really polarized from one another and isolated. And for me, even though I am very Irish, I'm not really in the mainstream of Irish culture, and that was really difficult for me growing up, without a religion, for example, because I didn't really have that community. And so I think, when I got into the climate movement and I found a community, I felt like it felt like, oh, this is what we're protecting. We're protecting the right to be like, I remember a COP26, there was a walkout at the end of the conference, and it was amazing because a group of us kind of gathered together. We started chanting, we held hands, we sang, we chanted in different languages, and like Arabic and French, and even myself and one of my friends / colleagues, we made up one in Irish, and it was a beautiful moment. And I think, like, for me, even though it was like physically exhausting, I think it really like fueled me for a long time, and still kind of fuels me when I think about it, because it's like this feeling of collective joy that we so rarely experience. And also, like you said, it's like this thing of like people understand what you are going through without having to talk about it in terms of climate activism. So I think that's certainly one element, you know, like the fact that that community is deliberately separated. We are deliberately kind of, you know, divided from one another so that we can't kind of make change, collectivize to actually change our systems. And that's something we really have to protect. But also not to drag this out too much or be too long with this, you know, I do think, like I mentioned before, you know, the fact is, like, the Irish language was very much degraded because of colonization, and colonization was because of the endless, you know, the pursuit of endless economic profits. And our language represents the fact that our ancestors had this really close tie to the land, and so we need to protect that language, both to maintain the memory of those who came before us, but also to say, well, just because Irish was not economically profitable to our colonizers does not mean that we are just going to let it go away. Sure, nobody else speaks it outside of this country, but that, you know, that's not the point of language. So I think for me, it's really important, the connection between protecting the Irish language and protecting the environment, and protecting all Indigenous cultures and languages. And I think that's really central for me, because I feel like it's about experiencing joy in spite of the pain and the trauma of generations, you know? And then I think the third thing for me is I have a personal interest in economics. So that's kind of more like political. That's not really like as emotional as the other two I was talking about. But, you know, I do think that economics is a really important element of climate change or the climate crisis in general, that is often sidelined. We tend to think that, like, we live by this kind of immutable set of economic rules, but in reality, the system that we live in is inherently broken, and we need to be at least critical, if not pushing for total change. So yeah, those are like the three things I think that would hold the most importance.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel that the passion that you'll have for or everything that you mentioned, especially preserving the Irish language, and you know, not letting those indigenous roots go away. I think that's something that I feel along with you, a lot of young people can relate to as well. And even when if I talk about India, there are hundreds of languages and hundreds of languages and cultures, and you know, we have a very diverse nation, and it's extremely difficult to, you know, even keep a track of what are we losing in the process of climate change, and the kind of impact that a developing nation like ours is facing. So loss of culture is one of the biggest things that, you know, climate change has confronted us with. And of course, and you mentioned economics, and that immediately took me to the concept of degrowth. And you know, I'm pretty sure you know about it, and how there is this huge discussion of developing nations and underdeveloped nations versus developed nations, and how the time for the growth of developed nations has to be not as fast as the developing nation should be. That it's a time for the ones who have not had an upper hand in the industrial revolution to come forward and be able to grow, while the developed nations can pause and at least give a space to grow, right? So the concept of degrowth is very interesting and intriguing, and I absolutely relate to the whole economics equation of how you feel interested. And of course, I'm sure a lot of young people do as well. So that brings me to the question of, you've been campaigning again since a long time. So do you have any anecdote of your proudest moment of climate while being in this space of climate activism?
I think probably it's that one that I already talked about at COP26, like that moment when we were all together and protesting. Um, yeah, I think that was probably, it's not even like the proudest moment, it's just the moment where I think everything kind of came together. Like we were all from all over the world and from every continent, and I'd say, yeah, just to give you a very short answer, I think that story, that is probably the one that, it's not even, like I said, it's not even pride, but it's just, I feel like it represents everything that we kind of fight for. And the world, it represents what the world should be, all of us together, united, and no hatred, and so much love and empathy and compassion, and yeah, and power as well.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. This sense of collectively coming together and joining hands, literally or figuratively, is quite powerful. And to experience it in its entirety, it's something that really makes you feel the importance of the fight that we're fighting against. Of course, of the whole. The depth of what we are into, right? So, yeah, I think we should move forward with a very a question for you that is specifically for what you're experiencing in your own country as a young Irish climate activist. What are your thoughts about climate action, or rather inaction, in your own country, right? What's happening in Ireland, and what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, so Ireland currently, our government is made up of three parties in coalition, and one of them is the Green Party. And the reason why they had so many more members of Parliament, or TDs as they're called here in Ireland, elected, was because of the protests. There was a green wave described at the time of the general election. But the issue is that often when smaller parties go into coalition with bigger parties, they compromise many, if not all, of their beliefs. So I feel like Ireland, our government, is quite disappointing because we were promised the kind of government that would be more supportive of actual systemic changes to fight against climate change. And the efforts that the current, the Minister for Environment, for example, is from the Green Party, and the efforts that he has taken are negligible. There's tiny, like, for example, implementing a carbon tax, which on paper sounds fine, but without adequate public transportation kind of infrastructure, and without affordable electric vehicles or electric alternatives, it's basically just increasing the cost of living crisis for people who are like purely reliant on petrol. And so it's sort of a bit, it's like, again, it's this thing of like very superficially addressing the climate crisis but not actually addressing the roots of it. And again, this contributes to why we need climate justice, because you can't address the climate crisis without addressing the roots, and that's why it's such a complex issue. Even recently, I think it was actually today that I was reading about it, the Green Party has put forward a proposal to actually a lot more like funding for public transport, but the other two parties are a bit pissed off about this, and because they would prefer more money towards more roads, which increases the infrastructure for private vehicles without having any alternative. And so apparently the other major parties in the coalition is asked to meet with the Minister for Environment because they worry that the Green Party is undermining them. So I'm hoping that this is the moment when the Green Party actually uses its position in the balance of power between these two big parties and says, well, we're going to pull out of government and make you have an early general election if you don't do this, which is, I think, perhaps what they should have always done. I think, however, their biggest issue is their lack of communication and their lack of, I think there's a tendency in politics to kind of be like, oh, well, we have to be respectful. And admittedly, yeah, you have to be respectful to a certain extent, but you have to be firm as well. You have to make sure that, you are not compromising your beliefs in the name of respectability. For example, recently, myself and two other climate activists interrupted the minister's speech because we have been respectable and we have tried to talk to him. We have talked to him face to face. We've met with him, at COP26 and various other events. and yet, we are seeing, for example, there's I don't know the full details behind it, but there is an LNG project that is basically in the works. So that's liquefied natural gas, and basically there's been massive protests to prevent this from happening, because it's really harmful to the environment, and also the idea that natural gas is a transitional energy. It's still a fossil fuel. Like, just because it's called natural doesn't mean it's clean. So it would be detrimental both for our carbon emissions and our kind of carbon budget in general, but also just for the environment. And there's been basically nobody has been listening to the protesters, including the minister. But I think the most major thing that's happened recently is that the Advisory Council on Climate Change here in Ireland has said that if the Irish government does not drastically change its policies, we will not achieve our goals for 2030, and that's really worrying. But it's kind of, I hope it's a wake-up call, and that's what this is what seems to be potentially happening, with this new kind of public transportation funding proposal, and that people finally, the Green Party, are actually realizing, okay, this is more severe than we thought. Europe is burning. It's getting closer to us. And so maybe we should do something before it's too late for us as well. So I think hopefully the recent increase in temperatures here in Europe, it's very close to home for us in Ireland, even though we're not necessarily experiencing it because it's Ireland and it always rains. I think hopefully it's a wake-up call, but certainly over the last 4 or 5 years of government, it's been negligible at best. So yeah.
For sharing that. Definitely, I think this again, this frustration that you have with your own government, and similarly a lot of us do as well with our own countries. The agendas that they have set to be achieved by 2030, or in fact, some countries, again, an example of India, since I'm from India, our Prime Minister has set an agenda of going net zero by 2075, which is way too ahead of what we would be envisioning, right? I think it's only fair a lot of times to disrupt spaces the way you did, to go into these diplomacy spaces and disrupt speeches, or in any way bring attention to the problem at hand and the urgency of it. And kudos to you for doing that. It takes a lot of courage and effort to be able to put yourself out there in such spaces and be that courageous. So really appreciate you for doing that. And let's move forward to, of course, how we got to know about you, which was the election for the UN Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change. And congratulations for that. Congratulations for being the youngest member in the council. And it's very exciting to see, especially a woman, a young woman representing youth in such being in the advisory group for Antonio Guterres. So what has been your experience until now being in the advisory group, and what do you feel is the most important thing that has to be achieved being in such an important role?
Yeah, well, it's been, very, very kind of surreal, I suppose, because, like I said, I've been to COP26, so it's the closest I've ever gotten to any kind of UN space. So I was a bit surprised when I got the email. I was like, what? And also, yeah, I'm a lot younger than most of the other members, which is a bit daunting sometimes, because I think, I might be wrong, but I think most, if not all of them, are graduates from university, and I haven't even applied yet. So I'm a bit like, oh my God. So that is a little scary, I suppose. But also, it does make me kind of go, oh, well, I'm younger, but whatever. Yeah, it's been really interesting experience. I think the other members of the youth advisory group are incredible people, and I certainly feel a lot of imposter syndrome because they're so amazing, and they're from all around the world, representing every region. So I'm technically representing Western Europe, which is really cool as well. That I'm from Ireland, because I feel like in these international spaces, Ireland is also so rarely actually represented or taken seriously. Everyone kind of thinks we're this cute little tiny country, which we are. We're tiny, but I feel like we have a lot of influence, both in terms of our history of being colonized and in terms of the fact that we are part of the European Union. Our government tries to align themselves with other Western countries, so we have, like, I feel like both worlds kind of, and I think it's really kind of an honor to be able to represent Ireland on a kind of a group of this level. Also, like I said, I haven't had that many experiences with the UN before, so I suppose it's coming face to face with. I was already kind of slightly critical of the UN, and so I suppose coming face to face with the bureaucracy of it, and some of the difficulties in even just understanding where I need to go or who I need to go to do something, or what I even need to do something. That's been really complicated for me. So I think but at the same time, being on a Zoom call and seeing the Secretary General there, it's like, what the hell is happening? And it's very, very strange. I feel like, I haven't actually met any of the other members in person yet because of my exams. I wasn't able to go to the SB. So I'm sure, in September, when we're in New York for the UN General Assembly, I'll sort of hopefully understand it a bit more. But I do think the role itself is very broad, and that provides a lot of freedom in terms of, like, we can kind of do a lot of what we can do things that might not necessarily be deemed kind of the right procedure, and other constituencies might not be able to do. But at the same time, that's, like I said, been a bit difficult for me because I'm so unfamiliar with these UN spaces. So it's a combination of, like, it's a crazy roller coaster, and I think certainly, like, it, on one hand, it's such a different world, and it's such an opportunity to be able to kind of reach a different space at a different level, so much of a higher level than anything I've ever experienced before. And even the fact that, like, you guys heard about me from it's weird. But I think at the same time, there is a lot of pressure because, especially for me, because, like I said, I'm not familiar with the processes of the organization, and I really don't want to come away from these 2 years, having just spent them trying to figure out the processes. So I think for me, I have to figure out a balance between, following the necessary procedural things we have to do, while also advocating for my beliefs, and ensuring that it's not, because for me it's not about, like, a CV thing or anything, although that is a benefit, I have to admit. It's really more so about actually hoping, at least trying, and probably failing, the track record of the UN in terms of change, but to bring certain things into the agenda, like degrowth. It's not discussed at all in the UN. It's not something that is even seen as remotely feasible. And even I think it's SDG 8, talks about decent work and economic growth, as if those two things are, not mutually exclusive. And so, like, even ingrained in the SDGs, we have this idea of eternal growth. And so I feel like that's something I really want to do, is just bring that in there, to say, even if it's just me saying it in a meeting, I feel like it's something that is never discussed. So if all I can do is kind of alert the Secretary General, or alert UN spaces to the fact that we need to be more critical of our economic systems, I feel like I'll be happy with these 2 years. Yeah.
I love the passion you have for catering to the economic systems. And this is genuinely very few times that we hear, even in spaces where young people have discussions to have better economic systems. And I mean, a lot of the issues that we are facing today is because of the impacts of capitalism itself. So when we know the root cause, how are we not catering to the very thing that can lead us to a better path? So I absolutely understand and appreciate the passion that you have for it. And I hope that you'll be able to make a dent in the UN system with the ideas that you have. And it's really refreshing to hear all of this. And of course, UN spaces can be quite difficult to understand. And I have also experienced the same. It's on the outside, you feel that, okay, this is a very prestigious space and, it's really a privilege to be here, of course. But to get in there and understand what exactly is happening, since it's a huge system, it can take a while for someone who is absolutely new to it. So I'm sure that you'll get there. And it's going to be an interesting journey for you as well. And it's really, really exciting to hear your plans of what you want to do in the advisory group and with the other climate change makers and activists with you. And of course, it'll be a good experience to converse and be able to share space with other passionate young climate activists. So all the best to you for that. And on that note, towards the end, the last question that I want to ask you is, how do you see and envision the youth climate movement in the future? And of course, how do you envision would be the importance of young people in climate justice?
I think in terms of the climate movement in the future, I would hope that in the future we don't need a climate movement. I would hope that we kind of achieve the climate justice that the climate movement is fighting for. I think it's important as we go forward to consider, like in Ireland, for example, and I'm sure it happened in other places with COVID-19, a lot of the momentum dropped off, and that was really difficult for the movement because, we couldn't organize protests. And then when we were able to again, people had more immediate concerns, which is completely understandable, but like a little frustrating for us because, it is still such an important issue. So I think it's really important to consider what are the things that we can do to bring the attention back to the climate crisis. And I think it was really incredible with the intervention that we did, three of us did, and it wasn't on behalf of Fridays Future, it was completely on a whim. But that intervention, it got a lot of attention. And I think it illustrated the anger that a lot of people are feeling in Ireland towards the government. Because the people who voted the Greens in, they also support us. And so when they're seeing that they're not doing adequately or remotely adequate climate action, I feel like there is a lot of anger. And I think direct action challenges people to kind of challenge their own beliefs. For example, when we did it, people shushed us. And they told us that we were being disrespectful. And someone muttered, "Oh, I thought this would be a space where people would actually respect the minister." So, but then later I gave a speech, and I think a lot of people came up to me afterwards and said, "Oh, I'm really sorry, you completely changed my mind on the matter." So I think, I think people need to remember that anger is what we should be feeling, and that we should be expressing that anger. And unfortunately, the protests in a lot of places have been, not all of them, but a lot of them have been co-opted. Like in Ireland, ministers would come to the protests as if, what were they protesting? They were in government, but they were protesting the government. So I think certainly we need to seize our democratic power, and maybe one of the ways to do that is by interrupting. And there's certainly other ways to do that as well. And I think that's what I'm saying. I think, especially as people in the youth climate movement get older, like I'm 18 now, and I have the ability to vote. And so it is my right as a citizen of my country, and as somebody who has voting rights, to exercise my democratic right. And I think, again, that's the thing, especially for people who live in democracies, the most powerful thing they can do is to vote. And young people are underrepresented in the polls in Ireland, and I'm sure in other places. And so it's really important that we actually come out and we make sure as best we can that our governments are not, that they actually have our interests at heart. And even if that fails, we know that we tried our best as citizens of a democracy. And I think in terms of young people, the importance of young people in climate justice, as you said, I think young people, first of all, I don't think young people should have to protest. I think it's ridiculous that, at 13 years of age, I had to leave school every Friday and join in a protest. But I also think young people need to be involved in civic spaces. And I'm not sure exactly what the best model to do that is, because I've been in civic spaces that have been organized by the government and it hasn't quite worked. So I'm not sure what meaningful youth engagement exactly looks like, but I think young people, even in a perfect world, young people have to be involved in decision making, because we are inheriting the system that we get, and that this, we're inheriting the system that our elders mess up or don't mess up, preferably. So I feel like young people are incredibly important in every element of kind of like political change, but especially in terms of climate justice. I mean, it's the very fact that out of every single group, it is young people that are going to be affected the worst. In general, young people from across the world, like in Ireland, for example, young people will have to deal with, well, not even in Ireland, but just across the world, young people will have to deal with the effects of what their leaders didn't do. And it's kind of more drastic even than just, an economic recession, for example, which is also very drastic, but this is literally, whether or not our planet is livable. So I feel like in terms of climate justice, it's necessary for young people to once again exercise their democratic right and to get out there on the streets and to interrupt and to ensure that our voices are heard. I think it's also that threat of like, when we can vote, we will vote you out. So yeah.
Absolutely resonate with everything that you said, every single thing that you've covered. It's so important to have meaningful youth action in diplomacy spaces and decision-making spaces, and the accessibility is extremely less in a lot of nations, and it's just frustrating to see that we have to make that action of going out and protesting in the streets or trying to disrupt or or even harboring anger, which we were not supposed to do if this wouldn't have taken place in the first place, right? So it's extremely relatable, and it's something that all young people, everyone has seeks to do, which is collectively fight for a just future. We are the inheritors of the planet. We have to be represented. We have to be taken into consideration when policies are being made and when there is a question of representation. And of course, all the words that you have said to in this session, it has been extremely valuable, and this is much needed for other young people to listen to and to know that you can start at a young age. You can start at any age and question the authorities and go out there and do what you can as a young person, and feel empowered as much as you can. So thank you so much, Saoirse. It has been such a wonderful honor to have you. And if there's anything that you want to end the session with, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think I've said everything, but yeah. Thank you so much for having me, honestly.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we'll be conducting more such interviews in the future. And we're so happy to have you here today. And thank you so much for taking out time. Thank you.
Thank you.